an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Unsouled, chapters 19, 20, and Epilogue. In these chapters, there is a showdown with Whitehall, the 8-year-old who's really an old man. And Lindon finds out some shit that changes everything about the way he sees himself and the way he sees his clan. He's growing up. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andrew for commissioning this episode. I'm excited because Andrew has decided to commission all of the rest of the series. So if any of you are reading along with me, I won't be getting into book 2 until August at this point. But once I restart, it's going to be a straight shot through all the rest of the books. So yay, that'll be fun. And I am confident that despite there being the delay before the start of the next book, I do not think that I am going to forget what happened here. And I hope that there are some people who see that I'm covering this and are motivated to read it. I have a lot of people now saying that they don't like to bother reading stuff unless I'm covering it because they just need somebody to like digest it with. And that's kind of fun. So hopefully this will lead to some new people finding this book because I think it's a really fun one in a really unusual world. So let's start off with chapter 19. We have Lindon and Yerin in their getaway car, which is a red cloud. Doesn't sound super like, I don't even want to say luxurious. It almost doesn't even sound dignified. This is one of those things that I low-key want to see into the author's mind as to how they pictured it. Because the way I'm picturing it, I mean, it was described as like a rust-colored cloud. So right away, I'm not inclined to think too much of it because rust is like the kind of coloring that makes things look old and sort of discarded and neglected. And from my understanding, they are like inside the cloud. So I imagine that they begin to look that color, like if you're looking at them from the outside. And the cloud itself, it turns out, I thought it was like extremely rare. But as we see later, it's rare enough to be valuable for sure, but it's not unheard of. And I forgot that that's something that I think Rom was his name, the keeper of that treasure hall. I think he said to Lindon that everything here, like while valuable, will look like a toy in comparison to the stuff that's in the other halls. So I keep sort of like forgetting about the implications of that and that probably there are more of these than just the one. So it's honestly, I had a bit of the same feeling in this section that Lindon did. And I love that the author zeroes in on that and talks about it. And I don't know if the author anticipated how readers are going to feel, or if he simply wanted to explore what it means to be greedy. But I appreciated this. So what we've got here is Lindon and Yerin are flying. And he decides to take an inventory of the stuff that he was able to get out of that treasure haul. And because he's figuring like the next time we land, who knows what the circumstances are going to be. We might not have time for this. So I may as well figure out what it is we've got to work with now, because we're about to go up against a fucking remnant of a gold level fighter, sword sage. So probably I can make use of something that we've got here. And the Star Lotus, which was the thing that I had said I had been a bit surprised he hadn't taken right away is one of the things that he grabbed up, which I really appreciated. Like, there is something so satisfying in books when they make you want something and you are eventually able to get it. And you didn't think, like, there are times where a character wants something and so you want it, but you also have a bit of trust that they will eventually get it. It's a sort of like, well, I know that for the story to progress, they need to achieve XYZ, and that thing will undoubtedly help them. So they will have to be able to get it. But with Lindon, I kind of thought that the moment where we see all of these other treasures were just meant to kind of like give us an idea of what he had to choose from, and tempt us as readers to pick something that might not actually be immediately practically helpful, and then show us why Lindon's choice was better and something that would be more useful. So as much as I wanted him to take this lotus, when he took the banners, I said even that I was kind of like, really? But then he immediately like wins against somebody with them, and I couldn't help but be like, well, I guess I was wrong. Okay. And I totally let go of this lotus as a potential thing that Lindon would grab, never thinking that he was going to be able to just turn around and go back into this treasure hall. And getting it now is very exciting to me. I was super, super happy about it. However, I definitely fell prey to the thing that he falls prey to, and that Yerin describes, I think, as dragon fever. I'm trying to find the spot. Yeah, dragon fever. So essentially, dragon fever is meant to be a descriptor for wanting gold for the sake of gold, as she puts it. And it's just greed. But it's like a kind of greed that's very specific. And I really want to know how many of y'all have run into this yourselves. It doesn't even have to be something that happens with money, although that's obviously, like, here it's regarding treasures, so it's also not exactly money. But Lindon's realizing as he looks through this stuff that he's gotten some of the most valuable things, and he doesn't feel particularly excited about it. And she can sense that's what's happening. And I love that he at first feels really ashamed of himself, that she can see through him, because he knows that he should be grateful and excited. And so her accusing him in his mind of having dragon fever, he's kind of like, oh shit, I feel like a real asshole now. But a second later, she's like, no, I have it too. Don't you worry. It's not just you. And let's see, 7 treasures. They were an unspeakable fortune to a Wei clan unsouled, but looking at them like this, they were almost disappointing. When he compared them to what they could have gotten away with, had they been allowed just another minute in the treasure hall. So what he has, and I'll back it up a little bit and talk about this. The spirit seals are, and I'm not sure I'm meant to exactly know how these work before we see how they work. But, you know, when he says that they have 48 spirit seals, I thought you would only need 1 for the remnant. And then he says, but if they had a few left over, and I was like, a few left over? There are 48. How many do you have to use against this guy? So right there, I'm thinking, wow, 48. Oh, no, that's apparently not that many. You know, we get a little bit of an idea. Just, I mean, not how useless, but just how diminished this little cache is. The Star Lotus Bud would help him break through to copper almost immediately, and he had to remind himself more than a dozen times that it would be foolish to eat it now. The ancestral orris fruit had taken him days to digest, and the Star Lotus should take even longer. The last thing he needed was something in his own core distracting him when he might need to fight. I thought that was interesting because you really like come at this sort of thinking that the lotus and the fruit and these elixirs, as much as it has been said to us that they need to cycle in order to process what they digest, what they have taken in, it's still hard for me to appreciate what that actually means and not simply see it as an immediate power up. Like, I keep thinking of these things as not just ascending to the next level, but also like healing. And that's not exactly right. And they aren't, instead of, for example, something that you would see in like a RPG game where you drink something and are immediately granted access to a power. This works a little bit more like something in Animal Crossing, where you like put it in place and then you can come back tomorrow and see if it's like doing anything. And you just sort of wait. And that is, by one token, very frustrating. And you're just like, but I want it now. And on the other hand, I think shows a lot of restraint on the part of the author, who clearly didn't want to give these characters an easy out where they could just carry potions on them and drink them and suddenly be healed from whatever, powered up to the next level. This is something that is it still requires time and focus, and it's not I was going to say it's not an easy thing. It is easy. You're just eating. He's able to ascend to copper without having to put in the work that he otherwise would. So it's certainly a shortcut, but it's not without any sort of requirements from him in terms of effort. So yeah, he occupied himself watching the Sylvan River Seed, the little blue flame spirit that danced around in its glass enclosure. Lindon had asked what the river seed could be used for, but Yerin herself was unclear. They were rare, she knew that, and you were supposed to raise them, or maybe plant them. Either way, she was certain it was worth more money than anything else they had snatched, including the cloud. I admit, the Sylvan is the thing that really caught my fancy the most. I wanted him to take the lotus because... sorry, trying to roll forward here. I wanted him to take the lotus because him being unsouled and so far behind is obviously like the main obstacle for him. But the Sylvan was the thing that for me was really riveting. Like, first of all, it's in this tiny little biodome that's got like a river that's flowing, and it's mentioned that like, you know, they're tossed around and they're traveling and moving, and the river doesn't get shaken out of place. It feels like it has its own gravity or something inside of this container. And also, I am always here for like magical sidekicks, and I have a low-key hope that this Sylvan is going to like grow and become like a friend or a pet or something that is like able to interact with them and be maybe like a magical servitor, or give them information about like things that they wouldn't otherwise know about or have access to without a creature from like, you know, a denizen of that dimension. I don't know. I don't have any real solid theories on this, but I just like the Sylvan as a potential, you know, there's a lot of possibility there. So as much as like, I recognize that the lotus flower is the more practical thing that I wanted him to grab up right away, this is the thing that I was the most overall curious about. And I am very, very excited to see what happens with this thing. I hope that they don't just sell it or plant it and leave it somewhere. I hope that they are able to like, you know, nurture it and grow it. And we'll see. Let's see. The parasite ring was like the star lotus bud in that it would eventually help Lindon to overcome his deficiencies, but wasn't of any immediate use. He added to that the half-silver dagger. His parents had owned a few half-silver weapons, but he'd never had one of his own, and the white fox boundary flags as the least valuable treasures they'd stolen. The boundary was difficult to obtain, but it also took a long time to set up, and a powerful enough opponent would simply tear through it. He had been lucky to use it against Kazan Maderet. And yeah, it's just a nice moment, because as I'm reading this as, you know, an outsider, I'm feeling kind of like, man, there are some badass things in there, and this is what he got. Like, I wanted to know about the Sylvan, and the Star Lotus Bud is compelling. I know we need the, like, you know, seals to grab up the remnant, but there were some other things that were, like, wild. And immediately, she's like, yeah, you're kind of not super happy with this, right? And Lindon, when she says this, reacts, and it's understandable. He thinks that she's sort of like maybe accusing him. I don't even want to say accusing, but insinuating or concerned, perhaps, that he is feeling greedy enough that he would try and like rip her off and take some of her share. And he immediately is like, that's not, I hope you don't think that's what's happening. But some of these things I definitely think will be more useful to me than to you because of what your strengths are. And she's like, oh, don't worry. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just laughing at the fact that we managed to get away, and I still kind of want to turn around and go back anyway, because there's so much great stuff back there. So she says, it helps to keep your eyes fixed on one thing. Grab whatever else you can, but don't go blind to what really matters. My master says, and then she corrects herself and says, my master used to say, distraction kills more sacred artists than enemies ever do. I really like this as a general principle for life, because we all, I mean, to a degree, as human beings, we can never actually get to a point of being satisfied and continue to want to push ourselves and grow. I think that there's a part of us that wants and always wants, because that is how we improve ourselves and become better. And it's just human nature to always be looking for the next thing and like constantly be trying to self-improve. But at the same time, we often tend to not enjoy the things that we have. And we will get something that we thought would make us happy. And once we get it, we rarely really sit back and let ourselves like just exist with the thing and see how we feel about it. Once we achieve the goal we set for ourselves, there's this impulse to immediately set a new goal, to not rest on our laurels. I think for some of us, there's a bit of paranoia that maybe if we like are too chill, that we will never push ourselves again. That if we like let ourselves be too satisfied with a victory, that we won't be motivated to go after the next one. So we have to strike while the iron's hot. I know I get that way about myself. So I will not really like enjoy and savor the moment the way that I should, the way that I intended to when I set the goal initially. And when she says, you know, focus on one thing, and I'm going back, let's see, fixate on one thing, grab whatever else you can, but don't go blind to what really matters. That's a really good way to put it. Like, if you can set another goal for yourself, if you can move to another level, start the next thing, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But make sure that you don't do that at the expense of really appreciating what it is you have achieved and what you have now. And that's a very hard line. You know, you got to figure that out for yourself, and everybody is going to be different. But it's something that over the past few years, I've really, really begun to realize about myself. It's just how easy it is to get caught up in the idea of goals as a concept and not really look at what the goals mean individually. Because as a society, we can be very data driven, and we like to be able to say, I set this many goals and I achieved this many of them, and not really take the time to look at whether those goals were quality goals in the first place, whether you made them or not. If they weren't of value and you didn't make the most of them, then what really did you achieve? Anyway, I just like that line. And I never really thought about it as distraction, which is what she says. And that makes total sense. Like, that's a really good way to say it. It's not even just like taking for granted, although sometimes that can be part of it. It's distraction. Your focus goes somewhere else right away, and you just don't, you have a limited attention span as a person. So if you put your focus on something else, that just naturally remains that there's only a smaller percentage left. And we're people, man. We don't have the ability to focus on a bunch of things adequately at the same time. So this is when we hear about Suriel's, or not Suriel, Yerin's, I keep saying Yerin. I don't know why I keep saying her name is Yerin. Yerin. She talks about her master here. And I really appreciated this, because it would be very easy to write her as just this avenging angel of rage and grief, and the grief be kind of masked behind the rage, and have her act out and be extremely aggressive and violent. And for that, like, to be the shorthand for us all to know that he meant a lot to her. But the author allows her to be genuinely emotional about it. She is talking about how her master only came to the valley for her. Wouldn't have bothered coming on his own. It was just a safe place for me to train. But it doesn't matter how strong you are when you're poisoned in your sleep. And I really like that as she talks about him, Lindon keeps expecting her to have a look on her face that's like wrathful. But when he finally gets a glance, it's just sad. It's just like her remembering the things that he said to her and realizing that she's not going to get to see him again. And there is nothing quite like the moment that you really absorb somebody has gone. Like, she knows that her master's dead, but she has been attacked over and over again by I keep wanting to call them the Heaven's Gate cult. But hasn't had a moment to rest, to let anything sink in. She has been fighting for her life from the second that he died. So this is really the first time that she has spoken about him in a way that isn't like an item on the to-do list. Like, we have to go and harvest his remnant. That's like something, a mission, you know. This is the first time she's talking about him as a person and what he meant to her. And it's very affecting, and much more so than I would have expected, considering that we never got to meet him and we don't know Yerin that well. But it's still got to me, you know. And she says that her master might have taken Lindon with them. He could be soft that way, but first he'd have killed your clan elders for what they were teaching you. And this is the first indication that we get. We don't get detail until a little bit later, that how Lindon has been raised and the information he has been given is not correct. And when she tells Lindon later, and I'll get to it, I really love how that recontextualizes what we heard. Because, you know, when we were in Whitehall's head and he's thinking about what happened while he was gone and how he missed the big fight against the Sword Sage, he is reflecting on how they had wanted to buy some of his treasures, and the sword sage laughed at them and said that they weren't worthy to have any of this stuff. And there was a bit of me that was kind of like, ooh, yeah, I could see that being really insulting and like reacting in a way that's extremely irrational and full of resentment. But, you know, I also was like, that's really disgusting. Like, he was a guest. I have like a bit of the leftover guest right Song of Ice and Fire fairy kind of thing going on in my head with that. But now, once we find out what we do, it's really clear that, like, these are people in his mind that do not even really understand how any of this magic works. Like, they are, even the Jades, she says later, are in training still. So it's sort of like being a guest in a class, like a home ec class, when you are this world-renowned chef and they're still baking blueberry muffins, but they want to buy your knife set and your, you know, seasoned cast iron pans and all of this stuff. And you're just looking at them like, you aren't even going to know what to do with this. No, I'm not selling this to you. I need it, first of all. And second of all, you don't even know what you're doing. And probably not laughing at them would have been a good start. But also, I can see how when there are people who overestimate themselves so much, and, you know, if in my example, you're visiting a home ec class, you tell them, well, this is stuff that you don't know how to use. I'm looking at that as there are students that know they are students who are willing to bow to your expertise. But this is a guy coming in from the outside that knows that they are not his equals, and they don't. They think they are more than his equals, and that he's just some fucking... They don't realize how advanced he is until they kill him, is really the vibe that I get. It's not until his shade comes up and begins to fuck shit up that they truly understand how much more advanced he was. And so they come at him thinking that he is uppity, is really what, you know, the impression. And that they killed him for having the nerve to tell them they weren't worthy of a thing, when what the fuck did he think made him worthy? And it turns out there was something. He was definitely more advanced than them, but they don't see past, like, their expectation of what this skill all looks like and how people behave when they have it. So I don't know. I really love all of this being revealed at the end here because it's a nice setup for the next book. I feel like it's ending a book, especially when it's going to be a big series. Andrew told me that the author is aiming for 12 books total. And I think he said that there are 7 out as of right now. It's really easy to end a book in a place that feels like it isn't an ending. It feels like it's the pause before the next one. Or it can go the other way where the first book will end and feel so complete that you're kind of like, I don't even know if I want a sequel. Like, I like these characters and everything, but I don't feel like we need another book. And I thought that this was well done because we are brought into this world trusting Lindon's upbringing as being the word on how this magic works. We don't know any better. We are like Lindon. This is all we have heard about how anything works. So we are just as much at everyone's mercy as he has been. And there isn't even a suggestion that there is other stuff that they don't really know beyond the dusty tome that had the, twin star method and the empty palm. other than that, there's not really a lot of implication until we go into Suriel's, monologue with him telling him that you are definitely, like, even if you reached the highest level here, would not be adequate to stopping what's coming. It's just, I really like that we get fooled, really is kind of the word. I really like that we wind up in the same place as him where we think that we know. And then we find out that, first of all, a gold level is bare minimum for what he's going to need to be able to do. And that's shocking enough because poor Lindon hasn't even got copper. So we know how big a deal that is. But then we find out that not only is gold bare minimum, it's like unheard of amongst his people for the last couple of 100 years. But the way they are sorted into their houses, essentially, is deeply flawed. And that, for me, is so reassuring. Because I even said during an episode, it would be easy to discount this sorting method, but it's obviously based on something real. And Yerin's it is based on something real. It's based on what you are initially very good at, but you don't have to do the thing that it just says you're good at. You can do anything, and really you should have foundation in everything if you want to be particularly good. And, I said that I would talk about all this later. I'm just getting into it. It's fine. And I love that Lindon is like, well, I know my mom did occasional spells, basically. They never use the word spells, I don't think. But he says my mom did some stuff that was strikers, even though she's a forger. And Yerin's like, yeah, no, you're misunderstanding. You should have the fundamentals of all of them. That this isn't I do all of this one thing, but I also still know how to read. Congratulations. That's you should definitely have more than that under your belt. And I don't this is something that I, in my recent years have struggled with is realizing that and it's sort of a weird comparison to make, but I think you guys are going to understand what I am saying. We have kids choose their majors in college at the age of 18, 17 for me. I think actually I started my applications when I was 16 and I was 17 when I went into my freshman year of college. That's insane. You are asking kids to choose schooling that at that time, and not so much anymore, but at the time that I was in school, was meant to determine the course of your life. And you are asking them to do it when they have no real idea about themselves. They have just started to be exposed to the kinds of obstacles that teach you what you're good at and what isn't for you. And also you are supposed to take out a lot of loans in most of our cases in order to pay for the schooling that you are basing your life on. It's the kind of commitment that is just, it is extremely intense. And to demand it when people are so young, and at the time you feel I think I might be ready to make this kind of decision. But looking back as an adult, you're like, oh my God, I did not know anything. There's a real face palming sort of moment for me when I think back on that and how I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was agreeing to with the loans. When you tell a kid in the abstract that they're going to have to pay this back, they don't get, what that really looks like month to month. And they don't know that the economy is going to collapse and having a degree is not going to be the guarantee of a steady job anymore. And these kids having this test that determines how their module works and what they will do. And it's just assigned to them without their real, they don't choose to follow it. they are told, oh, this is what you are. It's not a decision, and it's not because they're interested. And I wonder if he went back to his clan and he looked and talked to some of the kids that like got put into their assigned roles. How many of them are still deeply satisfied with what they're doing and they feel like, yes, I'm good at this and I like this. And how many of them would be like, I mean, I'm good at this and it's certainly my strength, but I do find forging really interesting. And I wish that I could do more of that. You know, we don't get to talk to anybody, so it's not clear to me how often that is like I don't even know if the people of his clan would even admit that to themselves, or if they would feel like that was sort of a betrayal of the system they've been raised within, and so they wouldn't admit that they were not satisfied with their line of work. But yeah, once he realizes that like it doesn't work that way, he is so freed up, and it's just a wonderful moment because I really was so frustrated, you guys. When I was in college, I hinged so much on succeeding there and finding the major that was right for me. And it was part of why I jumped from school to school and part of why I have so much debt now, because I thought I needed to figure it out then or else I would always be screwed. And there is a lot of fear mongering around choosing the right school, choosing the right major, making sure that you are in a position to have a job. And now I'm doing something for a living that has nothing to do really with almost anything that I studied. And this is a job that straight up did not exist when I was in school. So you can't exactly prepare yourself completely for that sort of thing. And Lindon being freed of the constraints of these, like, you know, 4 different options that he could be given and realizing that it doesn't have to be that way. I imagine that it's how I felt, similar to how I felt when I realized that I could do this for a living and have this be my job, where you're almost afraid to get your hopes up that that's possible because you're so sure that's not going to work because that's too good. I always have a small voice in my head telling me to enjoy this while it lasts because you're going to crash and burn eventually. This isn't sustainable as a job. And for all I fucking know, that's true. That's a real fear. It's there, but there's also this like elation of just, I can't believe that I get to do this, you know? So I hope that Lindon like gets time to really enjoy that feeling of freedom. So anyway, let's back up and talk about the ancestor's tomb. They get there and Lindon sees that there are 2 guards, and one of them sends up a signal that there's a security breach coming. And Lindon tells her that he is going to help her however he can, even though he's not particularly good in a fight. And there's this thing again with her not trusting him. She says, you won't give up midstream and beg for your life at this point. And he says, there's no reason for that. I may be weak, but I'm not a coward. And she says, couldn't know that when I made you swear, could I? I trust you more now. A notch more. And honestly, as much as this irritated me initially, and I understood why Lindon was so annoyed, there's a part of me that kind of wants this to be like a running joke from now on. How they might travel together for literal years and she will still be like, yeah, I almost trust you. I think that would be kind of funny. So she says, we live or die together. And she takes off in an explosion of snow, blasting forward with a speed only an iron body could achieve. And Lindon, while she's over here starting to engage in the fight, is packing their treasures back into his bag. There is something super funny about the juxtaposition between what Lindon tends to be doing in these scenes and what she's doing. She's out here just like, it kind of reminds me of in Venture Brothers, how occasionally like Brock will just turn up like covered in soot and cuts, or, you know, just obviously in the middle of like this nutty adventure while everybody else is just not really even registering that he's doing anything. And that's kind of how I feel about it with Lindon. Like, he's over here packing the bag earlier. He's like, you know, figuring out what they're going to take from this treasure haul, while she is the one that is like trying to fucking stay alive and take the other person down. So the cloud, as it turns out, doesn't like, he wanted to like put it away, and it turns out it doesn't fold. It doesn't compress. It doesn't make itself smaller so it can be put anywhere. So he has to sort of like make a leash and carry it with him, which I find really funny. And he is watching the fight between her and the two guards as she's getting towards the tomb, and she takes them out, and he's sort of worried that they're dead, even though he knows that's like kind of gonna be expected. But she says that she doesn't want to face any more remnants, which is a good point. And I sort of like that about this world, that killing people has its own like consequence that's very immediate and tangible, so that it's not as appealing an option as it can sometimes be. Like, there's, you know, not in life, I'm not saying, but when I'm watching a television show or I'm reading a book and there's somebody who's an obvious threat and people choose to not kill them, it can be super frustrating that I'm just like, oh my God, I don't want to see this person again. Just take them out of the equation, please. But having there be remnants that come back is really adds a whole other dimension here. It sort of reminds me of in the Garth Nix series that I've been reading also, how if you kill somebody, their body can be taken over by somebody who's using necromancy. And so leaving corpses behind is like kind of a bad habit to get into, because you can wind up giving somebody soldiers for their army without intending to. So jumping ahead, he is setting up the banners as strategic support. And as he's doing that, this fucking door of the tomb just like tears in half, and he goes absolutely flying. And he thinks that he went flying because of the door. And he realizes a second later that he went flying because Yerin shoved him out of the way just in time to keep him from being fucking cut in half again. And I just really love the fact that it specifically says he would be lying at the top of the steps in two pieces. This kid cannot fucking get away from being bisected, man. He needs to get some sort of charm or something to keep that off him. So the remnant, I thought, was going to recognize her. And it turns out not so. Not only does it not recognize her, it doesn't look like him. And I gotta tell y'all, this unnerved the ever-loving shit out of me. I thought we were going to be dealing with a fucking, like, Force Ghost style, you know, just an impression of what he looked like in life. But no. He sounds like the T-1000. The only parts Lindon recognized as Madra at all were 3 hoops crisscrossing its chest. One a loop of white, one scarlet, one inky black, spinning in rapid orbit. And its face was featureless, A mass of rippling liquid steel in the shape of a human, as though someone had poured a mirror over a man. It had no arms or legs, merely an uninterrupted sheet of metal, and it flowed over the ground like a snail. I am just getting serious Terminator vibes here. That's all I'm saying. And it's compelling. It's very interesting. But it caught me off guard. I really had... I had one of those moments that I have a lot when I do what I do, which is I will walk into a situation not thinking that I have a preconceived notion of how this is going to go. And when it's not that, I suddenly realize I had an expectation and I didn't even think I did, but I absolutely thought I knew what this was going to be, and it was not. And then when she introduces herself in a way, it just looks at her and I'm thinking, like, are we waiting for it to acknowledge that she's a friend? Apparently not. She has to battle this fucking thing in a way that I didn't think was going to be necessary. And then it says 6 limbs of liquid metal sprouted from the remnant's back, flattening and sharpening until it stood under a halo of blades. Word? This thing is just like turning itself into a fucking like oscillating fan of death. I don't understand how this is allowed. And like there's a part of me that almost is like, it'd be worth dying to be able to do this kind of dope shit. But I don't know how much control you have over it or how much of your consciousness remains with a remnant. Like, if any of it remained, I would assume he would recognize her. But perhaps he does, and he is still obligated to make it challenging. Maybe he has to fight her with everything he has in order for her to win and have it mean something, you know? So anyway, they get into this fucking fight, and I kind of love that it's not told to us in that much detail. There's like, some of it is told, but then Lindon is, you know, busy doing his own thing. And he realizes that fucking Whitehall is watching and sort of doing his little sneak attacks from the side, waiting for one of them to win or both of them to lose so that he can swoop in and get what he wants. And Lindon decides that he is going to take this motherfucker. I like that we get to see from Whitehall's perspective and really get that he, as much as he is like way more advanced than Lindon, even he is hugely impressed with the display here. It's clear that this is the kind of advanced that nobody has ever seen before in that, you know, who is still alive. And Lindon comes at him and intends to do the empty palm. I was about to say open palm. And Whitehall catches his wrist, which is not what Lindon had expected. And he doesn't know what to do. But then Whitehall tosses him. And this is a great moment. I love this. With one clumsy effort, he flung the entire packet of spirit seals into the remnant's general direction. They would most likely be cut to pieces in midair, and even if they landed, they had a better chance of slapping harmlessly into the ground than touching the remnant. He needed something else. He could still feel his spirit's connection to the 1,000-mile clouds, so he poured Madra into it, clutching at anything that might save him. When Yerin saw him, her eyes widened, then narrowed on the falling seals. She didn't hesitate. Her defensive stance collapsed, and the blood instantly sprayed up from her body in 5 lines as she took the remnant's attacks. Her sword gathered force like a heat haze, and as she sliced from bottom to top, a wave of colorless power tore from her weapon. The Madra struck the remnant head-on, slashing a vertical gash in its pristine surface and knocking it back a few paces into the falling seals. It shuddered as the scripted papers sank into its body, causing the forged Madra that made up its form to ripple like a slapped puddle. The rest of Yerin's slash whipped through the open door of the tomb, dragging a line of destruction across the tiles and blasting a man-sized tear in the interior wall. So I really like this because not only is this a really badass, oh fuck, I just lost this fight, wait, I'm going to make the best of it moment that happens super quickly, but this is also what later leads Whitehall to be like, you're not a fucking Unsouled, you fucking liar, which is so gratifying. I just deeply enjoy Whitehall being like, there's no way you pull all of this shit off if you're Unsouled. Like, think what you want, buddy. Sure. Yeah, I'm definitely way more of a threat than I let on. Yes, think that. So he offers for Lindon to team up with him and become his disciple, personal disciple. And Lindon, there's a tiny moment where he thinks about how this was everything that he could have wanted at one point. But he fucking died once. And he isn't going to throw his second chance away. And secondly, Yerin is promising him magic that they don't even have in the valley, which Whitehall seems really, if anything, that for him seems to be more of an indicator that he and Lindon should work together, because he feels the same way, that there's clearly magic out there that they don't even know about. And he wants to get in on that. But the thing with Whitehall is it's a very selfish motivation. He and Lindon want the same things for completely, diverging reasons. So, yeah, I liked this moment, and the fact that, like, Whitehall's beginning to realize that Lindon has more potential than he thought. So Whitehall, when he realizes that Lindon is not going to work with him, decides that he is going to do the empty palm to Lindon, which it was interesting to me that he knew what it was. But he does it, and in the moment that he does it, Lindon splits his core. This is something that he had been reading about and preparing to eventually do. But he never really made himself, because it's supposed to be very painful. And it's incredibly painful. Like, his scream is so out of proportion to the actual hit that he took that I believe Whitehall is just kind of for a second, what the fuck? And Whitehall tries to do this, empty palm thing to him, but misses because the cores are out of the way. And it's not even empty palm, actually. I'm saying that because it's a similar movement, and it's supposed to be debilitating. But what Whitehall is intending to do, actually, because I said it's surprising that he knows it, but he doesn't. He's intending to just completely ruin Lindon's core entirely. So Lindon is disabled at the moment because he is Unsouled, but he has the potential to catch up to everybody else. If Whitehall managed to do what he was trying to do, I mean, Lindon probably would not actually survive. He wouldn't be able to do anything to fix this. So let's see. I'm trying to find the spot. Okay, yeah. Summoning strength from the depth of his spirit, Lindon rose to his feet and lunged. Before Whitehall could react, Lindon had wrapped both hands around a small waist. Then he lifted Elder Whitehall into the air. The elder screamed as Lindon staggered over to the wall. And he's flailing and kicking and punching. And when the floor fell out from under him, he knew he'd chosen well. They pitched out the hole in the side of the wall. Whitehall tumbled away from him. His eyes met Lindon's, and he looked pitifully like a confused, terrified boy. Lindon caught himself on the edge of a floating red cloud. It had taken him the very last drop of strength to drag the cloud along behind him. And it is really like Whitehall hits the rocks underneath him, and poor Lindon is like genuinely worried. Like, he's sad that he had to kill somebody again. He's worried that the elder might actually survive. And then when he doesn't, he sees the remnant that is like a really, it says a twisted dwarf, a deformed imp drawn in shining yellow lines. And I kind of want to know more about why they look the way they do, where the author decided who was going to look like what when they turned into a remnant. But this, I'm assuming, is part of the deficiency of character, and also the fact that there is some like decay happening within that wasn't seen externally. So we're like getting to see the ravages of age, maybe. But yeah, Lindon isn't able to keep the cloud aloft because he's so exhausted. So he's like inching lower and lower and being like, did I fucking kill this guy? And now the remnant's still going to get me. Is this what we're doing? It's really funny. He thinks that this thing is going to come at him and believes that's what's happening. But then it turns out that it's Yerin who has like jumped into the cloud with him. And she manages to pour some of her mantra into the cloud and get it like lifting again. Let's see. It didn't seem to want to rise, but she forced it up, jumping it back to the cliff in a series of awkward jerks. So they managed. I wonder how long these like remnants remain. Like, do they just keep wandering around? Do they sink into the earth? I'm wondering that. So let's see. Oh, right. So she's got the steel limb sticking out of her back, and later on it's mentioned that it like looks like the tail of a scorpion, like arching up over her head. I don't like it, guys. That's freaking me out. How come she can't just like, I don't know, pull that out when she needs it and put it away otherwise? I don't like it. So she has the gold, what do you call it, badge, and puts that on. And at this point, there are new guards showing up, and they really come at her until they see the fucking gold badge, and then they back up. And Lindon, as she is sort of intimidating them, menacing them, he eats half of this lotus flower. And he has this theory, as he puts it, that he can follow two paths if he splits his core, because he still thinks that's how it works. While keeping one core tightly closed, he directed the Star Lotus Madra into the other. It had a small effect immediately, but many of the pale pink dots stayed in the core, tickling him from the inside out. When he'd finished gathering the Star Lotus energy into one core, he expected the other. It was totally clear. So, yeah, this is an interesting thing. Like, if things don't work the way that he thought, and he doesn't need to have split his core in order for there to be like proficiency with multiple callings, what advantage will this have? Is it just going to continue to be a good defense because nobody expects his cores to be split and they're going to go after him like that again? Is it possible that he might be able to cycle more quickly, or maybe like more efficiently? I don't know. But yeah, he has to convince Yerin to not just stay and fight all of these guards. And he does it by just saying, please don't leave me here to die, which really gets to her. And she's like resentful of how effective it was, but it does. And Yerin is telling him that she wants the other half of the lotus. And he's like, hey, so I split my core in two, and that half that I ate only went into half the core. So he explains to her what he did. And this is when he realizes that she isn't having the reaction that he expected. You saw me stick solid sword Madra in the doorway. What kind of technique do you contend that is? And she shows him how many different things she did that were all of different techniques. And he says most people can only learn a technique if their spirit has an affinity for it. And she's like, that doesn't sound true to me. I mean, you're using an enforcer technique by splitting your core. And the empty palm is a striker move. And she says, it's a rotting trap of a test and it fills you all up with lies. The test doesn't show you who you are. It shows you what you're best at, where you start, not where you end up. Outside of the valley, you don't get to call yourself a sacred artist until you've at least learned the basics of all 4 disciplines and harvested a remnant. To my eyes, every one of your elders is still in training. I never even heard the word unsouled before coming here. You started 2 steps behind, and that's it. You could still reach everything that everybody else has. You just started behind. And I love this. He decides that he is going to call what he is doing the path of the twin stars and begins to journal about it right away. And he's weeping and just very emotional about this. And it's like, it's a really nice moment because it sort of reminds me, I've been talking about how being unsouled is sort of like a disability where there's just no accommodations made and nobody respects you and they don't understand that things can be different for different people. And this moment is like when you have a really terrible learning disability and you finally find a teacher who is able to explain a thing to you in a way that you understand. And as somebody who always thought I was terrible at math, I had a teacher who I was getting perfect scores on my tests because they just decided to teach it in a different way and it made sense. And there's this is something that I wish more people could appreciate, is how different our minds all work and how different our bodies all work, and appreciate that what works for one person won't for another. And that's fine. That's absolutely how it's supposed to be. So I liked this ending. And then we get the epilogue of, Suriel looking in on what's going on with Lindon and how they're flying over, him and Yerin are flying over these ruins that she says the transcendent ruin had risen in the heart of the forest for the first time in 800 years. We don't get told what that means, but it calls sacred artists and other darker things waiting in the surrounding wilds, which makes me nervous. And also that there are creatures the size of buildings prowling in the shadows beneath the leaves under their cloud. So thank God they have this fucking cloud to travel with, because otherwise this sounds like Shadow of the Colossus out here. And then we have the last, and I'm so over time, but I just wanted to mention this moment with the snow fox, Elder Whisper. He had been following Lindon this whole time and is sort of feeling hopeful, and seems to be aware that the Dread Gods are going to return and did not think that the valley was going to make it. And it seems like that Whisper had been kind of resigned to that and now is suddenly oh my God, maybe Lindon can actually do something. And then we have Suriel, and she has this sort of weird confrontation with, what is his name? Harrow, I think. And he is working on behalf of a character named Machiel, who we haven't seen. But she says, tell Machiel I haven't found him. And he tells her he knows he's looking himself since you remain unmotivated. And apparently this means that both Machiel and whoever it is he's looking for will die. So this pushes her a little bit to fulfill her end of a bargain that she apparently made. And they're watching a world that is dying. Its adept population already evacuated. So it's a weird scene that I don't fully comprehend. I feel like this will probably mean more to me a little bit later. But the way this is talked about, it sort of feels like this is another world dying in a string of them. That there's like almost some sort of plague happening. Maybe there's someone like very powerful out here eating worlds or doing, it seems like there's somebody responsible for this. So she agrees that she will try harder to find whoever it is. And when she asks, his name isn't Harrow. Sorry. Harrow is the name, I guess, of the area that she's in. His name is Gadriel. She asks what his mission is, and he says mercy. And she looks at him and is like, that's not appropriate for you to do because you're a shield and you're supposed to protect. So you shouldn't do this. And she draws her weapon. And it ends with the paragraph, she wondered if this had been Machiel's plan all along, to make her face the reality of the situation by dirtying her own hands. It wouldn't change anything either way. This was still her duty. Heart aching, she activated her sword. And that is the end. So I am very much over time and I really have to go. But thank you again to Andrew for commissioning this. I'm very excited to get on to the next books. And I hope that you guys have all enjoyed the coverage. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Well, soon in a couple months. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.